John immersed himself in the lives and interests of other people, and as I said, the radicalism came partly from Dell starting to read and from the ideas that he heard around him. But the radicalism wasn't just in kind of other social activities, it was also on the home front too. And John didn't marry a feminist. That wasn't what he thought he was getting, but he found himself married to one. And a lot of people of his generation struggled with that, and John probably did too, but it didn't show. He embraced it, and he was open to change. He was open to new things, and was excited by it. And I can remember. I mean, it meant basic changes around the house like that. Everybody else had to contribute to cooking and cleaning and basic household chores and that kind of stuff. And I can remember distinctly John correcting me, or one of us at some point, when one of us referred to the new regime as being that we were going to help Dell with the cleaning, and he pointed out that no, we weren't helping Dell with it. It isn't actually Dell's stuff anymore. It's our stuff, so we're helping each other with it. John, one of the things also about John was that he ended up in this high status position, and he used it quite interestingly. I thought he would in political activities where it was usually sort of young, radical, long-haired people. John would turn up there with us and be not quite what whoever was trying to stop us was expecting there. Middle-aged, distinguished chap, and he was there all the way. He did it in other ways too. We had this guy who boarded with us. I'm not quite sure how. We had various boarders, but one of the boarders we had was a guy by the name of Rana, and Rana was when we were in Hawkesbury, so it would have been the late 60s, early 70s. I don't know quite how he came to board with us, but he was a young Māori guy with tattoos and I think he was working in a trades training thing or something at one of the hostels here, or associated with one of the hostels. And he stayed at our place and was just kind of part of things. And he got picked up one night and by the police for, I don't know, deliberately being a young Māori in town or something like that. And they took him home, and they picked him up and they said, "Who are you? What do you think you're doing?" And he said, "Where do you live?" He said, "I live at 32 Hawkesbury Ave with Dr. Small's house." And they said, "Oh yeah, right." So they took him down and took him round and knocked on the door at night and said, "This guy reckons he lives here." And John said, "Yeah, that's right, he lives here. We'll see you later." And I think it was also part of what John was like, that he was able to kind of interact and connect with people of a wide variety of backgrounds, and took people for what they were. He retired from the university at the end of the 80s, and prior to that he had done a few kind of unusual things. While he was still on the staff, he started taking French language lessons. And then French language courses at university. He also, when he realised that computing was something that had to happen, he went and joined a typing class in town, in sort of old style. They were still doing them on typewriters, so he was the only man and about 30 years older than the next oldest person in the class. And he also did an English language teaching course just before his retirement too. So the year after he retired, he took off on a big adventure to China and went and taught English in China. And then beyond his retirement, he had a fantastic retirement. He would never cease to tell us how enjoyable it was. He was a psychologist and a counsellor, educator in an academic sense, but really his true academic passion was he was a historian. That was what it wasn't that he wasn't into the other stuff, he was into those other stuff, but once he retired, what he wanted to do in his spare time, he ended up writing a whole heap of histories, and they were so good that people would come and ask him for more. So he wrote a history of the Long Beach estate, which is the part of Canterbury where he grew up. He wrote a history of the education department that he worked in, that was nearly 100 years old at the time. He wrote a history of Cashmere Primary School. He wrote a history of the Timor Football Club in Ashburton, the Celtic Football Club in Ashburton, and he wrote a history of 100 years of soccer football in Canterbury, for which he won an award. He was into that sort of thing, and he also really loved travel, and did travel. And he when I said he embraced himself in what people were doing. In his retirement, he just revelled in the whole range of different things that all of his offspring were engaged in, and immersed himself in a whole variety of those sorts of activities. Remained very open to them. I just want to. I realise I've been going on for a while. I just want to speak a little bit about John's final years. Up until about 2010, everybody who knew John just expected that he would go on forever. He was physically fit and well. He was mentally on the ball. He had regular subscriptions to the London Review of Books and the New York Review of Books and the Guardian Weekly that he read all the time. I think he was still reading the dictionary at that stage of his peculiarities. He used to complain about when he tried to get travel insurance for going overseas, that it was really high for people of his age, because hardly anybody, people of his age, it was a matter of what medication you were on. He wasn't on any medication. The end of 2010, he caught pneumonia and had to be hospitalised with it. When he went into hospital, they said, as I always say, when was the last time you were in hospital? He said, the only time I've been in hospital before was when I got my tonsils out when I was 11. And so he got that infection, and then the earthquake happened in February 2011, and Del and John got basically bombed out of their place and dislocated, moved up to Auckland and so on. And really, it was around about that stage that John's mental deterioration started to kick in. Initially it was getting muddled up with things and not being able to recall the immediate past, and then it sort of got on to sort of more complicated things. One of the things about his mental deterioration is that right up until the end, he was never in any doubt at all about who he was with. And that was so important to him, because being with his loved ones was basically all he was about in the last years of his life. And so that presence was something that he really held right till the end. And he always said that he had this sort of charmed, happy life. As I said, he had difficulty with memory things. I asked him about it once. I said, how do you feel about, kind of forgetting things? And he said, what do you mean? My memory's fine. He said, I can remember, and he tells me these things that happened ages ago. He talked me through the details of a Hannon Shields game when he was playing for North Otago, and this is a connection of North Otago, South Otago and Mid Canterbury, who collectively played the Australian national team in 1948 or whatever, and thrashed them like 40 points to 8 or something. And he told me like who scored in what order and stuff. And this was, while this deterioration was going on. So he did have memories. He just didn't have all of the right memories in the right order. He also retained, while there was a bit of wiring going awry, he also retained his sharp sort of intellect and trying to make sense of the world. He, after the earthquake, for the last part of 2011, John came over to stay with me and my family in Washington DC, where we were based. And somehow or other John had got it into his mind that where we were was actually Christchurch that had been rebuilt after the earthquake. And he knew Roger Sutton and always admired Roger Sutton, and he was wow, look what Roger's done here. That's amazing. He was going, look, that tree over there, the size of that tree, that must have been transplanted. It's not a big old tree, and there's no dieback on it. And he was talking about, how the roads were on the different side of the road, and the currency and the buildings had changed, all the stuff had changed. It was amazing, actually. And I was trying to say, well, possibly a more sort of simple explanation would be, we're not actually in Christchurch. Actually, Washington DC was like, there's the Washington Monument and stuff. But I gave up in the end. I couldn't persuade him of it. But one of the really interesting things about it was while he was wrestling with it, he was marveling about it, wrestling with us, and he sat me down at one point. We were sitting down at one point, and he said, David, there must have been an extraordinary amount of controversy and debate about the Americanisation of the way and the final, I suppose, the final comment I'll make also about his sort of intellect and his sense of sort of humour and so on, was one that I'm not even quite sure the source of this, but it was dated from last year, late last year I think, when somebody who visited him asked him how he was, and he was aware that things were deteriorating a little bit. He said, "How are you doing, John?" He said, "I'm okay," but he said, "But I'm not very astute." So he was astute enough to recognise that he had lost his astuteness. So look, it's gone on for ages, but I thank you for indulging us, and I'll welcome and encourage you to do what Martin is about to take you to do.